And joining me now is Colin Matthew. He's the local representative for the Ontario Secondary School Teachers for Trillium Lakelands District School Board. Colin, thanks very much for taking the time today. We just chatted earlier this week about COVID and how that relates to what's happening in schools right now. And now we're in a lockdown. So I wanted to talk to you about that and how that's affecting schools right now. First initial thoughts here, Colin.
Yeah, it seems to be like so many of the other announcements this government's made around its COVID strategy, if you can use that term, which is very much piecemeal. And so what we see are a huge number of businesses being locked down, a stay-at-home order issued for all non-essential travel, and yet you see schools remaining open. And given what we know at this point about the risk of transmission, and the fact that schools clearly are one of the sources of transmission of this virus, it just seems kind of incongruent.
So, Colin, we talked earlier this week about, we talked about teachers and needing to get vaccinations. It seems like the Ford government is moving forward with that, but only for special education teachers in the province and then other educational workers that are in hot zones. How do you feel about how that is moving right now? Because technically in Muskoka, we're not really getting a lot of cases, but, we just had a teacher at Riverside that was infected. So, do you think there should be a wider berth still?
Yeah, we'd like to see if schools are in fact going to remain open. We'd like to see them be as safe as possible, obviously for all workers as well as for students and their families. I think it's a good place to start with the workers who are in the most contact with students, and that's going to include educational assistants as well as teachers who deal with special needs kids primarily. But broadly speaking, all of our members are exposed to students in fairly close quarters. We have no restriction on class size put in place by the Ministry of Education nor by the school board. And so we have classes in excess of 30 kids. Students are unmasked to eat lunch. And in those cases, education workers are in and out of the rooms with unmasked students. So absolutely would like to see the vaccine rollout broaden to all education workers as well as all frontline workers, essentially a much broader definition of that term.
Colin, back to the lockdown and again, how this is being viewed in terms of everything being shut down except schools. I know the preference for everyone is for schools to stay open, especially, teachers. It's been difficult for online learning. But in terms of the fact that we're trying to curb the virus right now with this stay-at-home order, do you think it's better to keep these schools open or should we be doing a mass closure of schools as well in the province?
Well, I think any decision obviously needs to be driven by the science, and they're getting a lot of good advice. You're seeing it in the mainstream media as well as on social media. There are a lot of experts weighing in on this. I think that what probably is required in our area, where you mentioned case counts in the community remain quite low, is probably a greater subtlety or level of granularity to the strategy. There are certain kids who, without question, thrive when they're in schools and are significantly disadvantaged when they're expected to study from home. That may be for any one of a variety of reasons, whether it's family situation at home or the individual needs of that student. So if we were to take a more nuanced, more subtle approach and have the students in the schools that absolutely need to be there, we would have the ability to offer a much safer environment in that those students would have a lot more space and there would be a lot fewer bodies in the schools. The vast majority of students at this point can learn from home, whether it be virtually or through some other means of distance education. And so I think that by taking a more subtle, more nuanced and strategic approach, we can ensure both the delivery of quality public education and the safety of all workers and students.
So let's talk about April break. We're heading into that soon. There was, back when March break was moved to April break, there was some speculation that the Ford government might try to shut down schools following the break like they did last year with the March break. Given the direction that everything is going in right now, and again, this is speculation, nobody has a crystal ball, but with what's happening, do you think there's a strong possibility that we could be seeing another closure after the break?
I'm assuming at this point that their decision to either close or not close schools following the break is going to be driven by science in some way or another. We've made inquiries of the local medicals of officers of health to explain to us what the criteria would be to close schools. And the answer we got back was that it's the Ministry of Ed that makes that decision. And the Ministry of Education certainly has not been forthcoming on what the criteria might be. So it's very difficult to guess. We would hope that there would be a science-driven criteria, whether it be the RT rate, the number of community cases, whatever that might be. that would make that decision one way or another following this April break. And most certainly, if cases change in the Muskoka area between now and as the break starts to wrap up, we would hope that that's a decision that they would make in the interest of safety.
All right. Colin, I appreciate your insight. I appreciate your input. You're always a valuable resource in this area and obviously a great advocate for the teachers that you're representing. So thank you very much for taking the time today.
I appreciate your interest in the story. Thanks, James.